Sterling started back in the late 60s. It was the first place in New York or in America to be able to do stereo disc cutting, okay? And that was back in 1968. So we've been around, nearly 40 years now. I started with the company in 1976, beginning in 1976, and with the exception of a few years in another location here, I've been with the company since then. Sterling was purchased from its original owners about 7 years ago. We built this brand new place in Chelsea, in the Chelsea market in New York. We have 9 mastering engineers. We usually have somewhere between 30 and 40% of all the top 200 on the Billboard charts. But beyond that, because of electronic delivery of digital media, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've been doing projects from all over the world. We have many projects that come in from Japan, from Australia, from France, Spain, Italy, and it's really been great. It's been able to help us offset some of the changes in the domestic record business, which, as everyone knows, has kind of shrunk down over the last few years. Well, I'm one of the senior mastering engineers. We have 7 guys in the senior category, and we have four guys kind of in the junior category, whatever. We were able to deliver the product that we produce here at different rates depending on people's position in the business. So if someone's just coming into the music business, doesn't really have the budget to spend on one of our senior guys, we have the same equipment, the same rooms, the same quality coming from guys who are not inexperienced, but a little less experienced. And when I say less experienced, one of the guys is doing it for 12 years rather than 35 or 40 years like some of our other guys. I mean, mastering is the kind of thing where you really do need to have like a big, wide overview of audio and of sound and of music, because you're taking something which is essentially already finished, and you're actually finishing it even more. So it's a concept which some people who are new to the business don't really understand, but it's an enhancement process which is very, very particular to each and every project. That type of enhancement takes a certain sensitivity and sensibility to the genre of music that kind of gets presented to you. So, for example, I don't really have any experience with hip-hop music. If somebody plays me a hip-hop mix, it'll generally sound good to me in a musical sense if it's good music. But in a sonic sense, I don't really have that shape of what that should sound like, whereas one of our really experienced urban guys can pick up on things immediately. And the same is true with me in reverse. If somebody gives me something with a very melodic singer and some acoustic guitars and everything, I can tell you that vocal should be placed in a certain position and that the guitar should be a certain width or a certain size. So we cover all the bases here. We have somebody for every type of music. I had a completely weird way of getting into the music business, which was I was a journalism student. I got a master's in journalism from the University of Massachusetts, and I was looking for a job in New York back in 1972. And I went on 2 or 3 job interviews and kept getting, just applications handed to me. Didn't even really get to talk to anybody, talk to a secretary or whatever. And I went to a party one night and met this guy who had worked in a recording studio, and he was working with John Lennon. And I was such a music fan in those years. I was a guitarist, and I was like a crazy music fan. So I couldn't believe it was the first person I ever met that worked in a recording studio, let alone work with one of the Beatles, So I was just beside myself. And a couple of months later, I get a call saying that this guy was working at the studio and they needed somebody to drive a truck to go to record a concert down in North Carolina. Yes, was the group. So I was working at a shoe store at the time, and I had no connection with the music business besides going to this party and meeting this guy. That was the one connection. So I showed up and I drove the truck for a week. Drove the truck back, met a couple of guys there, and just started to kind of go over there and hang out with the guys, and was eventually offered a very low-paying job just being a helper. Had no technical background. Basically was a very, very lightweight, folk guitarist. And I just learned from being on the ground at Record Plant Studios in New York, which at that time was just an amazing studio. New York Dolls, John Lennon was there all the time, and Bowie was there. It was just an amazing, but Springsteen was there all the time. It was just a place where everything was happening. So I got just unbelievably lucky. And when I meet kids now who spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 getting trained to do a technical job, I just realize that no matter how much they know, if they're not in that right spot where their talent or their enthusiasm can be discovered, it's just going to go for naught. You have to kind of combine all those elements. recently I've worked with John Mayer. I've done a whole bunch of Sarah McLachlan albums. I I kind of specialize, I guess, in that because I think I'm known for getting vocals to kind of sound as good as they could possibly sound post-mix. I have a whole bunch of clients, jazz clients, tenor saxophone, Josh Redman, Joe Lovano, Michael Brecker, I mean, Branford Marsalis. You know, I kind of, in my head, in my ears, I have that sound planted so that I can take a mix, which maybe isn't quite there, and enhance it to the point where it really is at maximum quality for the listener, you know. I also do lots of world music, Yusu Endure. You know, it's almost seasonal. If you have a hit, like the John Mayer album that I did will be out in a couple of months, and I guarantee you that next year, from Europe or from Japan, I'll be getting the John Mayer, the artists who are kind of modeling themselves after John Mayer. Back in the early 80s when I did Lenny Kravitz's albums, I started getting a whole bunch of work from Europe and from Japan, which had the kind of really elemental rock, classic rock sound that Lenny had. So the clients kind of generate other clients, and there's kind of a web that moves along. And I know a couple of years ago I had done one hip-hop album. The guy's name was Tricky. I just did one album. And a guy from Germany came about a year later, and he had 2 hip-hop albums. And I listened to them. I was astounded. I said, why did you come to me with this music? I never do this music. He said, well, you did this Tricky album. It sounded fantastic. I said, yeah, but that's the only one I did. So, you know, it's just kind of an organic generation of whoever really shows up here and how successful those records are. You know, many of the records that I get are not records that the general public hear about, but musicians will find them. You know, I did an album last year, a band from Austin called Spoon. And I don't know how Spoon got to me, but I did the Spoon album, and I must have got 6 albums this year with these kind of indie rock, college radio rock bands that were from the Spoon album. Or Interpol. I did Interpol, and I got another album called, I forgot the name of it, but it was a similar thing. It was like 80s, kind of a modern version of 80s music. And then sometimes, you know, you get, you know, I just did an album by a group called Bad Brains that had been around for forever and ever, and going back to when I used to do the Ramones back in the 70s, you know. I did all the punk stuff. So, you know, people choose you based on, I think, the emotion that they have with the records that they love. They'll flip them over, they'll see the names on there, and you get an identification, which doesn't necessarily have to do with how well you mastered the record. It has to do with the identification that the person has with the record and with the people that are on there. So sometimes it's a surprise when they come in and see some of the other work that I've done, and it doesn't really match the, you know, what they had in their head as far as what I do. So that's kind of how mastering works. That's how people pick us, and how we continue to work after so many years of doing this. Mastering is really it's a musical enhancement. Okay, it's the equivalent of, if you think of photography, it would be, okay, if you go into Photoshop, you take a picture, the content is already decided. In Photoshop, you could frame it, you can enhance the colors, you could change the mood or the impact of that photo using Photoshop. In the old days, it would be in a developing process where they would use different chemicals, different lengths of time in the baths or whatever, okay? What mastering does, it takes something that's already been done, and someone interprets that if it's done in just a little bit of a different way, sonically, it will have more impact. Impact is probably the word that best describes it, because with impact, you can plug that into all different genres. Okay, if it's just someone with a nylon string acoustic guitar and a vocal, and it's sitting there and it sounds very muffled. In mastering, you can take that 2-track. Now, generally you're working with stereo only. You're not working with the tracks. In mixing, you're working with all the different elements. In mastering, you're working with the final mix down in 2 tracks, which is changing a little bit. I'll maybe describe that later. And you're taking those 2 tracks, and with the equipment that we have and the ears that we have, we can do this impact enhancement on that music, no matter what it is. Okay, if it's a jazz album, maybe the acoustic bass player was recorded okay but not great, and his part is intrinsic to that, but somehow in the mixing they didn't quite get there. You know, I'm kind of like a judge, but I'm a judge that can kind of criticize and judge, but also move it to the next level. This is why people will come from all different parts of the world and use us, or sends them from all parts of the world. Because they send you something finished and you send something back that sounds the same, but it sounds better. Okay? That's really what we do. That's the most general way that anyone can understand the process of mastering. On top of that, you need to learn how to edit the project together in whatever format it's going to be. If it's a CD, it's 12 or 15 songs. We're able to put those in the sequence that it's supposed to be. Not a complicated job. If the songs are too long, because the album is too long, we can edit them. Okay, so we were all expert editors, and we can offer advice on editing. If someone has a song that they want to be a single and it's 5.5 minutes and they want it to be 4 minutes, we know what to chop out if they don't know. Okay, if they're new to the business, little things like if you make an album, generally you don't make a real long song as the first song on an album. Sometimes we get people here who've never made an album before, and they have the 8-minute song as the first song. Well, after 35 years of doing this, I say, if you have 8 minutes, people sometimes don't have the patience if they don't love that song to get to the rest of your material. You might want to think twice about it. And they go like, wow, really? I didn't know that. So, we kind of impart the experience of the content onto the clients as well as the sonic thing, too. People generally ask me, what do you think the single should be or something? It's not my job. But because I've been around it so long, I can give little bits of advice on things that are not necessarily have to do with what we do. You kind of look at it you could look at it in reverse, okay? If an album is not mastered well, I mean, you can't have an album that's mastered poorly. In other words, it's either not mastered at all, which some people do now, or it's mastered by someone with no experience. The general impression to if you're trying to move up in the business, okay, is that person either didn't have good people around them or doesn't have really that good an ear. I think I'll give you an example, like James Taylor. Why, I have no idea, because in the very beginning, his albums always sounded great. Every James Taylor album from the very first album always sounded great. There hasn't been one that didn't sound great, okay? But there are artists that come out with albums that just sound just horrible. I mean, for instance, Oasis. Oasis is a phenomenal band, but mastering engineers will look at their work and go like, what were they thinking? I mean, it's just impossible to listen to this really loud. Great sound, great impact, but somehow the mastering, not quite right. Okay, I think that depending on who's their engineer. I mean, an artist. Some artists are artists / technical people, okay, and some aren't. I mean, and you never really know who's really going to be on it and who's not going to be on it. I mean, I had Emmylou Harrison here a couple of years ago, and she's the nicest person in the world, but she really wasn't into mastering. It really wasn't what she did. It wasn't how she listened to a record, and she had specific editing instructions and specific maybe vocal levels, her vocal level. So she really needed to depend on her producer or engineer to determine who's going to be mastering the record, okay? So the artist has to first determine kind of like what their position is in terms of the project. And I would say if I was an artist, I would defer to the creative people, to the audio people, to the recording people. Where do you want to master the record? Then go to the mastering, listen to what's being done, and if for some reason the mix no longer feels right, or if the mix that they listened to before mastering didn't give them the satisfaction, talk to the mastering engineer and just say, in this song I really thought my vocal could sound a little bit fuller, okay? So there is a way that the artist can kind of fit into the mastering if they're not an engineer, but generally I would defer, if I was an artist, I would defer the decisions to the technical people. Now, how would they as a team pick out who they wanted to use? I say from the records that they thought sounded great, They have a bunch of CDs, the ones that they thought sounded great, and ones that they didn't sound great, bring those to the mastering studio too. Say, we didn't like this. Why? What is it? And you'll be able to learn about what turned you on about it and what turned you off about certain types of sounds. So it's really grabbing the favorite records, I think. I mean, that's how I pick my favorite mastering engineers. I mean, I don't work with them, but there are guys around the world who, when I hear a record and it sounds fantastic, I bring it into the studio and I think, wow, what is this guy doing? This is great. So that's how, use your ears. Number one, never walk into a room that you don't know the sound of and start reacting to what you hear. Okay, I'll give you an example. I don't want to give this specific person, but there was a guy that came in my room, very, very well-known producer, with a group of his, probably done 20 albums. Walked into my room, had never been there before, listened to his project, and wanted me to add the bass drum, much more bass drum. Now, he had never been in my room before. When I listened to it, I thought there was plenty of bass drum. but he thought that it needed bass drum. Now, what he was actually saying was, my room, to his taste, needed to have more bass drum, not his project, okay? So the main thing is to be prepared. Listen to your mixes in different environments so you have an idea as an artist of what your thing needs. Figure out whether you like it or not. Figure out whether you're happy with it or not. And then when you come into the room, express whatever worries you have about the project to the engineer, and let him translate that into his language. Okay? Don't react to speakers into a room that you don't know. That's the main thing. And don't meddle in asking a million questions or telling stories. I mean, I can't tell you how much time is wasted. And sometimes it's not done with any evil intent or anything like that. But you can spend a lot of money telling stories in these sessions. They ask me stories about John Lennon, David Bowie, and all this stuff. I mean, you're paying $300 or $400 an hour. And talk about it later on. Plus, it takes me out of what I need to do. I need to listen. And there's ways of doing that. We have a lot of fun in there, because when you're recording what you've already listened to, the 3 or 4 minute song, you have plenty of time to get involved with it. So, really the way to get the most out of the session is to let the engineer do his job, but be prepared before. And you know what happens a lot of times? People are afraid to really. They're afraid of bad news. I think we're kind of all like this in a way. It's like we just want to trust other people. You go to a financial advisor to get stock tips, and you don't want to think about it because you're lazy. You want him to do it. Then he buys the stocks for you, and then he screws up, and you lose money, and you blame him. No, you blame yourself. If you go into a mastering session, you need to listen to what you have before and after, and determine whether you like it or not. Don't just say, "Well, I went to Greg Calbi, so Greg Calbi should know." Well, maybe Greg Calbi has different taste than you have, and you're gonna that CD is gonna exist for the rest of your life in a way that you don't think it could have been improved, but you didn't want to say anything because you went to Greg Calbi. No, tell him what you thought. Communication and take responsibility. I mean, that would be my two main pieces of advice to any musician that comes in. And trust your technical team. Don't if you hire somebody to engineer your album, to record it, and to mix your album. Don't be second guessing them all the time if you don't have the experience that they have. If you don't believe in them, don't hire them to begin with. Let them do their job. Let everybody do their job in the way that maxes out what they do. The first thing that affects the sound in a room which has analog equipment is the wiring. Okay, I use WireWorld is the brand of cable that I use for my interconnect. In other words, my tape machine. My D to A converter all comes up into my console with WireWorld. Recently, I started using harmonic technology wires, which have a completely different sound than my WireWorld wires. So what happens is the first thing that I decide to do is listen to the project that I have. I kind of listen to it with both wires to determine which one suits it, and there's no way of determining that in advance. This wire is a little bit more open and clear. The other wire is a little bit more, for want of a better word, earthy. Has a little bit more texture in the low end, and it's a little smoother. So one thing that I do is use the equipment. I use the equalizers and the compressors as signal path enhancers before I use them as equalizers or compressors. Okay. Each one of these pieces of gear has a specific sound. Every piece of gear everywhere has specific sound. It's just the way this room is set up. You can use them as sonic enhancement rather than just a way to get from point A to point B in a transparent way. Okay, some of them are more transparent than others. For example, the Manley compressor, the variable mu compressor, used as a gain stage, has a very full, rich sound. Okay, so if something comes in and it's very thin, I will immediately go to that and I'll try to enhance it with that just in a passive way. Okay. I can compare that to an amplifier I have here, which we built here, the Sterling Sound built, which basically has it's the same concept, but it has a different sound. So the wires and the equipment as a signal path enhancer are something that I do on every project. The fact that we get, I'd say 70% of our stuff now comes up on digital files rather than analog tape. It's really important to have a warming or an analog type enhancement. And I think that's one of the great things about Sterling is that we have some of this gear. Okay, so then we move on. The next stage would be equalization. Okay, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different equalizers. Each one of them is good for different things, but you never really know which different things are going to be good for until you hear the project. So I can use each of those equalizers to either add bass, roll bass off, add mid-range, add top end, all the things that equalizers do, but each one of these does it in a different way, different electronics, okay? So I need to take without being able to spend a week on a single project to try every single thing that we have in the room, I need to make a decision on a fly. Well, this equalizer will work for that vocal, okay? My API equalizer will add low mid-range better than my Manley will for certain things. I need to be able to translate that immediately, okay? Now, on a project like a couple of years ago, I did Bob Dylan's catalog, 16 albums. Okay, now this was funded by Sony Legacy, and we really had the time to be able to experiment. In this case, I could really use the different equalizers and try all kinds of different things and compare them. But most of the time, I don't have the time. We generally work in one day on an album. 8 hours is the maximum, 9 hours maximum. Okay, anywhere between 4 and 9 hours. So I need to be able to plug these things in equalization-wise. The next thing is compression, limiting, and compression. I have 3 or 4 limiter compressors. What do we use those for? Those are for kind of changing the position of things in the mix relative to the impact that you're trying to create. Frequently the drums will be too loud, okay? And by the drums being loud, it kind of pushes back the melodic elements of the mix. So how do you push the drums back? You need to compress them. How do you compress them? Different compressors have different sounds, different speeds, have a different effect on the percussive aspect, okay? Another thing that happens is in the bass area. If the bass is very warm and wide, you might want to make it a little bit more compact so it just kind of musically doesn't get in the way of the rhythmic elements of the mix. So I have a couple of different compressors here. I have these pendulum audio compressors, and one is a tube and one is a solid state, and they have a completely different sound. So again, one of those things. If I have the time, I'll try both of them. If I don't have the time, I need to make a decision on a fly. Then we move. We have a couple of different We have an equalizer here that Sterling, our techs, designed, which is just a bass and treble control. We put it at the end. The concept is a lot of times you have exactly what you want, but you just want it to be just a little more trebly or a little more bass, the way you would do it in your car stereo. Okay, so we have an equalizer for that. Then you move into the digital area where you're doing something a little bit different now. You're taking what you've done and you're trying to make what you've done sound as loud as possible for the medium of the CD, okay? This is where mastering gets a little bit more complicated, and you have to make a little bit more of a decision on your priorities. How important is volume, or how important is the music in terms of what you think will max out the intensity of the music? Just because something is louder doesn't necessarily mean it has more impact. Of course, if you're a little bit simple, you would think that just because it's louder, it has more impact. But then you realize sometimes if you just turn it up or turn it down, you've lost some impact by making it louder. Why does that happen? Because digital can only be so loud on a CD. All right, so we need to walk that line between the loud CD and enhancing the impact of the product. So I have a series of digital compressors here. One of them custom designed by Zsys, which is very transparent. I also have a regular standard L2, which really does have a sound. It has a sound to the point where you really need to equalize differently if you are going to use that. So again, my first question to my clients: what's your goal? What do you want? Does your CD need to be the loudest CD that you listen to on the day you take it home, or are you okay with it being less loud but possibly have more impact? So, we have something to plug in here for basically everything, and I haven't embarked on the plug-in software that we have in PeerMix or some of the new things that are coming out, but in the next few months I'll be working a little bit with the Audio Cube to try to develop the plug-in software in the Audio Cube to correlate with what I already do. Possibly make the CDs sound a little bit better, give me a little bit more creative control, a little bit more flexibility to be able to do some new things, keep it fresh, and that's basically what we got here. Well, it actually depends on the genre and the recording style. There are some, listen, guys from my generation will always be big analog fans because we've experienced it and we know how it sounds. We know how it's supposed to sound to the ear. But there are certain types of music and there's certain types of production that really don't do well when they're put through analog and warm up. I mean, something that's really analog creates a certain amount of density. Okay, so if the production ideas are already very dense, analog can tend to like saturate to the point where you don't have as much separation and clarity. So, you can't really make a general rule, particularly audio analog tape. I mean, people come in here frequently and will say, we want to get that analog sound, we couldn't afford tape. Is there a way you can bounce it to tape and then bounce it back to digital? I say, well, it's very easy to do that, but I just want to warn you, it's not always, doesn't always work as well as just running it through some, for instance, my analog tube amplifier. So we'll do one that way. It's an experimental thing, you just really never know. I did an album 2 weeks ago, which was, for one of it was kind of like a pop dance album, and it had very very percussive kind of electronic drums, and they just didn't sound good. The analog slowed them up. They got smeary and slowed up. Or if I kept it digital, everything stayed punchy and clear. Now it was a little bit bright. I would have liked it if it was a little richer, but musically it worked better to have that kind of very pingy sound. So we have enough. I have enough digital gear, enough digital processing that I can do it that way too. So there's so many decisions that you have to make kind of on the fly to try to figure out what to do. And if you have the time, on a project like that one, I took 2 or 3 songs and I tried it analog. I tried it digital, and even though I love analog, in that project analog was not good, and I didn't use the analog at all. Maybe there was one song later in the sequence, because there were multiple producers. I think there was one song. I listened to it and I went like, no, this one, the analog will help. So, but it's a great thing to have. I mean, this is one of the things where I try to be as open-minded as I can about home mastering and plug-in mastering and everything. But I gotta say, you at least owe it to yourself when you're trying to enhance a project to at least see what the analog channel, the analog chain can do to enhance the project. Not always going to work, but I say, at least 50 to 70% of the time, I have much better results with the analog. It's a very controversial topic, a very touchy topic, because the goal of what you do, and it has been the goal ever since I started in the 70s on vinyl, the goal has always been make it as loud as you can and still sound good. I mean, that's basically what we do. Now, the level wars have definitely pushed us to the point where it's like the tail is wagging the dog, okay? You're making it loud before you're making it good. And I think every single mastering engineer that I've ever spoken to, and I've done 2 or 3 panels, Tape Op and South by Southwest, and basically anytime you get a group of mastering engineers together, we all feel that we're pushed too far to make it loud, but that there are forces in the marketplace which want the CDs to be loud. And recently there's a new nuisance on which has emerged, which is the shuffle mode in an iPod. Shuffle mode in an iPod takes away the concept of listening to the album just in and of itself, and it makes it like a competition for impact between all the different songs on that iPod. And the thing that I need to do is I need to try to figure out how to make it as loud as I can and still make it sound good. I mean, the level war comes from being afraid that a certain part of your customer base will leave you if they perceive that you can't make the CD as loud. Okay, and loud is the most tangible element in audio, whether something is loud or soft. There's nothing. It's basically pretty simple. A 7-year-old can tell you whether something's louder than something else. I mean, it's just this is loud and this is low. But a 7-year-old child can't tell you whether the thing is working musically or not. That's a fine point. So again, the thing is, how far do you go with the loud where it still sounds musically intact? And I'm a big believer in the fact that dynamics are what create excitement or what create impact, and not volume doesn't create impact. And remember, when something is maxed to its full, you can't reintroduce the dynamics once they're not there. Okay, the dynamics are gone. No matter how low or how loud you make it, those drums which used to hit you like this will now hit you like softer. Okay, so if you needed that to make impact, it's gone. It's not there anymore. Loud makes guitar sound really loud. They make this very washed sound. There was a word that I never heard in the 70s and 80s with vinyl, which was fatiguing. I never heard this word fatiguing. I hear this word constantly now, fatiguing. What does fatiguing mean in listening to music? It means that you've been pushed so far that your ear no longer is enjoying getting anything in it, so it needs to rest, okay? You go to a concert and you're stuck on the side next to the speaker, your ear's starting to hurt. It's fatiguing, okay? But you're in a concert, you can't basically, you can't move, okay? I work under the assumption that music, the elements in the mix and the elements in music shouldn't be fatiguing. It should be something which you should be able to listen to and enjoy. You should be able to put headphones on and listen to an album top to bottom and enjoy it if that's the way it was designed. You want to put the headphones on and then after 3 songs go like, oh, this is killing me. I mean, what's the point? I mean, it's just ridiculous. So that in the iPod, your song could be louder than somebody else's song. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And the funny thing is, if in the iPod people would just punch in the normalization control or whatever, they had one, I think they've improved what they had or something like that, we wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. Because we certainly don't have to worry about it for radio, because radio uses compressors. Why are we worried in a carousel when you put your CD on and it's next to another CD? There is some insane like wives' tales that people use in a carousel. Somebody's CD is lower than the other person. So what? They already have the CD. What, they're not going to enjoy it. They're not going to think your band is good. There's another thing that comes up in the sequencing all the time. People try to put the songs like right on top of another song. And I've heard this all the time. They say they don't want people to get bored. I said, and I turn and I say, do you think if somebody has to wait another second for your song that they're going to be bored? I said, maybe you don't believe in your music if you think somebody can't wait 1 second. Well, we want to really just keep hitting them. I mean, there's like something wrong with everybody these days to try to grab everybody's attention. Make it loud. Make it fast. This is us. This is us. There's so many different ways of having impact with music that don't do this. So my advice to everybody is just calm down, figure out what you want to do. And if that's what you want to do, if you want to take everybody by the throat and strangle them, there are mastering engineers and mixers that know how to do that really well, and it's a legitimate thing. It's a legitimate function with some types of music, but not with all types of music. So generally the clients I have and the music that I work on doesn't really depend on that so much, and every once in a while when it does, I try to temper it with my insights and my feelings about what makes something work or not work. Mastering requires a certain type of personality, certain kind of flexibility, a certain openness. Some people really aren't suited for it. How you find that out in advance, I mean, you really do need to be able to work alone and be able to focus for long periods of time. How to prepare yourself to be a mastering engineer, I think, has a lot to do with how you hear and how you can explain what you hear. It really mixing is really the same thing. Recording engineering has a certain element of that, but because recording engineering requires a knowledge of microphones and rooms and placement, it's a little bit more physical. I mean, this mastering is like so internal. I've met over the last 10 years, I've met half a dozen guys who are really good at it, but who just can't seem to get to that next rung of clients. And I think that it's really important to have a really good personality as far as meeting new people and giving them in a very relaxed way, giving you a chance as a mastering engineer to let them try you and see what you can do. Again, because it's not as tangible as mixing and recording, I think it requires a little bit more of that. And there are just not, I've met these people over the course of the last few years, and they just don't. There's just not that many jobs to have in regular mastering places. So the guys that have developed their talent in New York have done so by being very aggressive and being out there and meeting bands and just giving an opportunity, having a real low price, starting out kind of at a low price, and showing what they can do. And there's some really good people who've emerged from that. And there's some people who probably, as the years go on, will get to get that level of notoriety where they'll start getting a great project. I mean, the best way to get notoriety as a mastering engineer is to do a great album. How you do that? I don't know. Lucky. I got lucky when I started. Did a couple albums that were very well known. I didn't know that much technically, but you got to get your name on some good records and waste as little time as possible. I give this advice to everybody starting in the music business. If music is bad, don't waste your time on it. If you don't like it and you don't think anybody else is going to like it, your work will go completely unnoticed, except for those people. Now, if you need experience, that's great. But don't continue to do projects with people that you know aren't going anywhere, or with bands that aren't committed to their career, because no one will hear what you do. And if no one hears what you do, you're not going to go anywhere with it.